Hi again guys, and welcome to episode 44 of Quattroporte, the review series for Gran Turismo's selection of sports and also super saloons, commonly called sedans, four-door vehicles, basically, sometimes hatchbacks as well, but generally four doors of high-performance nature. And in this particular pick we're featuring quite an interesting vehicle, and a vehicle which I personally think is better than I would have expected. Not in terms of compared to itself and what it could be capable of, but compared to what I wouldn't have thought it would have been as good as. And that'll make a bit more sense as I talk about it more. But the car in question is the Subaru Legacy, and specifically what is probably the most visually appealing Legacy in the game, the most shouty, the B4 Blitzen. Now, Blitzen is a German word, it means lightning, and this car was built in collaboration with Porsche design, and it's powered by, as the B4 name suggests, a boxer or flat 4 engine, as Subarus are well known for, and that 2-litre boxer engine, with, as you'd expect, a turbo, puts out 534 horsepower. So pretty decent power, not quite as much as maybe an Impreza of various generations, but still not bad at all. As far as torque, it puts out 404 foot-pounds, which again is impressive enough, and it only weighs 1188 kilos, which is pretty good, especially considering it does have all-wheel drive, which would generally add quite a bit of weight. The horsepower per tonne is just under 450, which again is not bad at all, given that it doesn't have a massive amount of power to work with, and the PP is, I would say, quite reasonable. It's certainly not too high, but it's close to being too high. It's about right. It's 548, fully tuned. You certainly wouldn't want it to be any higher than that because of the kind of opposition that you'd be coming up against. And for value for money, it's pretty good. Straight off the bat, it's a 30 grand car, so that's a pretty strong spec for the money. It's also quite a visually appealing car, as we said, probably the most eye-catching of all the legacies that are on the game, and the performance is very strong. The top speed is over 220 under its own power. It can launch off the line extremely well because of the all-wheel drive, and I would say, and this is probably going to be controversial among fans, but I would actually say that based on Gran Turismo's physics, which is of course nothing like real life, but purely on GT6, I would say that this is a better handling car than the Impreza. Now, I know a lot of Impreza fans probably won't like that, and would probably disagree. Maybe even non-Impreza fans would disagree. But the reason why I say that is because with the top-tier Japanese all-wheel drive cars, such as the Evo and the Impreza, some others, but primarily those two, those cars are built to be as fine-tunable as possible, because at the end of the day they are essentially rally car base models. They're designed to be taken and used more oftentimes than not for competition, for rallying, and to be built for the specific needs and requirements of a driver. So they need to have a certain amount of customizability straight out of the box. And as such, you can adjust the settings on those vehicles to drastically change the way primarily their all-wheel drive works, especially in the case of the Mitsubishi with the active yaw control, but also to some degree with Subaru. Now the Subaru, as I've said before, in the case of the Impreza, I would say is more forgiving than the Evo, but at the same time the Evo can still be slightly twitchy for an all-wheel drive car. It can have slightly unusual handling depending on how you set up the diff. With the Legacy though, from my tuning experience with the car at least, that doesn't happen. It's a very easy car to work with. Now the Legacy has always been the more sensible older brother of the Impreza, which is much more of a boy racer, more of a competition machine, but I kind of prefer that aspect of the Legacy, because the Legacy in most of its forms, surprisingly enough on the game, is actually not far off and sometimes equal to the kind of performance that you'd get from an Impreza. It's just not as shouty about it. It's more understated, more of a sleeper. This car makes the difference that it's not understated. It does get shouty about what it can do, with the crazy shaped wing, the louder paint colours, etc. And I like that. I think it's a good thing. I like sleeper cars. I like cars that are shouty. This is somewhere in the middle. It's not necessarily as extreme looking as the Imprezas, but it's certainly more shouty than the normal Legacy. Now for 30 grand, this is probably one of the main Subarus that I would recommend getting, because with the Impreza, you always know what you're going to get, because it's known for being a good car. With the Legacy, it might surprise you just how good this actually is, and it's not a car which you see many people using. It certainly has fans, very vocal ones, and it's a sought-after car in the JDM community, but on Gran Turismo, I very rarely see people use any of the Legacies, let alone the B4 Blitzen. And due to the fact that the car's a little bit quirkier, and a little bit more interesting to look at, and has, I would say, at least better handling than possibly all of the other Legacies and all of the Imprezas, but that is of course just my opinion, means that I would definitely recommend checking this car out. It's a very interesting alternative and a surprisingly effective one to the much more obvious choice of the Impreza. And also to some degree the Evos as well, and various other sports saloons. In terms of its overall range, the upsides and downsides are actually pretty much the same as the Impreza and the Evo. The strong points are exactly the same. It's good off-road, it has tons of grip, the acceleration is good, but just like those cars, it has the same essential downside, and that is that the power isn't really high enough to compete with the top-tier super saloons for overall performance, such as your M5s, your C63s, etc. But I'd definitely recommend checking this car out. But that's it overall for this episode. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.